Delighted to introduce our next case study, which will be presented by Sharon Mohammed, who's Director of Corporate and Regulatory Management with Maple Leaf Foods. And Sharon will be speaking on ensuring the safety of new plant-based products. So a nice segue from our last fireside chat on natural products into now plant-based products. So welcome, Sharon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Goodridge. Good afternoon again on day 2 of this virtual summit. My name is Sharon Mohammed, and as Dr. Goodridge indicated, I work with Maple Leaf Foods as the Director of Corporate Regulatory Management, and I'm delighted to join the group today to talk about the case study that's titled Ensuring the Safety of New Plant-Based Products. So today my presentation will cover these 3 objectives: producing plant-based products while meeting regulatory requirements, avoiding cross-contamination from actual meat sources or allergens, and ensuring the safe and proper preparation of products by the end users. And you will notice on this slide that I crossed out the words meat alternatives and artificial meats. And why is, as per the Maple Leaf's CEO, this food category is best titled as additive protein. So just to ground us, who are we? Maple Leaf is a leading protein, meat, and plant-based company, and we work in both the retail and food service markets. We're Canadian-based. We have 11,000 employees across Canada, US, and Asia. We have 6 slaughter plants. The ones that you see on this slide, there are 4 of them. They are our poultry slaughter plants, and the 2 that you see on this slide, which are in blue, are our pork slaughter plants. And also we have a hog division, which is not shown on this slide, where baby piglets are grown into hogs. So our pork side of the business is vertically integrated. The next slide shows our further processing plants, and that's actually where our plant-based products are made. There are 13 further process plants here in Canada, 4 of which make both meat and plant-based products, and there are 2 in the US which are 100% dedicated to plant-based protein production. And those are in the states of Massachusetts as well as in Washington. And those are actually shown on this slide in green. So just to ground us again, for those of us who live in Canada, you'll most likely be very familiar with the Maple Leaf brands shown on the right of this slide. But our plant-based portion of the business is under the Greenleaf Foods Company, under the brands Light Life and Field Roast. And you can see these on the left side of this slide. So after Beyond Meats and Impossible Foods, Greenleaf, as part of Maple Leaf Foods, we are the 3rd largest plant-based producer in North America. So now to hone in on the first objective of my presentation today, how to produce plant-based products while meeting regulatory requirements. Yes, there are similarities, and yes, there are differences between making plant-based foods for the US versus the Canadian market. Both US and Canada have a policy, but only in Canada we have guidance material, and in both countries we have, of course, label enforcement. The regulatory differences are detailed on the very bottom 3 rows of this table on this slide. And the first one is really interesting, where in Canada, plant-based foods must be labeled with the words simulated, while in the US, this labeling is not required. And on the second to last row, in the US and Europe, protein quality is determined by using the newest technology called PDCAS, which means protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. Yes, that is a mouthful. And while here in Canada, we only utilize protein efficiency ratios, which is PER, for assessing protein quality. PER is determined by animal studies, which is clearly outdated and very restrictive since it only recognizes a limited number of plant-based sources. Under the fortification on the slide here, only in Canada, we are the only country in the world that is required to formulate with vitamins and minerals to be equivalent to a meat product. Now, moving to my next slide, there are definitely regulatory challenges which I want to further detail. So the first one that is highlighted with the first arrow, there's consumer confusion in labeling plant-based foods with both the words simulated and plant-based. That will be very confusing to a consumer. And then the PER methodology for Canada hinders the ability to communicate varied protein claim benefits to consumers. These added and or fortified vitamins and minerals are typically synthetically made, even though consumers continue to look for clean, recognizable ingredients. So with one plant-based formulation, with fortification, which is required for the Canadian market, we need a totally different formulation without fortification for the US market. So that adds cost to our business. And beyond the cost of the vitamin and mineral fortification, of course, we need segregation in manufacturing, which all add up to a higher cost of producing a Canadian SKU versus a US SKU. So we have advocacy against these three regulatory challenges for plant-based foods. Greenleaf is a member of this trade association in Canada called Plant-Based Foods of Canada. There is also an equivalent to Plant-Based Foods of Canada in the US. It's called Plant-Based Foods Association. And for the specific Canadian regulatory challenges, we have started working with Health Canada for some advocacy to enable us to be more of a level playing field with the US. So we're very hopeful that all these Canadian regulatory agencies, Agri-Food, Health Canada, and CFIA work together to enable the changes to keep pace with innovation, with technology and consumer demands within a global marketplace. So now on to the second objective of my presentation today, how to avoid cross-contamination from actual meat sources or allergens. So the answer to this is there is truly no silver bullet. So many companies use different control measures and there are combinations of them. Just like in HACCP, they're used to reduce hazards and avoid cross-contamination when making human food. So if the line is shared between meat products and plant-based foods, then sanitation, scheduling, and segregation are used. If the line is only dedicated to plant-based foods, again, the same control measures, combinations among sanitation, scheduling, and segregation are used, but just want to point out that with plant-based foods, there are different proteins that are used. They are pea, there's mung bean, there's soy, there's potato protein, there's rice protein, and even faba bean protein. And I'm sure there will be new protein sources from an innovation perspective that will be added to that list. Now, for the third objective of my presentation today, how do we ensure the safe and proper preparation of additive proteins by the end user? So I have a short story to tell you. So a consumer sent in a complaint to FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the US. And again, this is a US regulatory agency who enforces plant-based foods. The consumer said the following: the product had plastic-looking casing and looked like something a person should not put in their body. The consumer also sent in this video. I'd like you to listen and look at it and see if you can see the problem, and you can actually might be able to see the root cause. If you do see the root cause, I would encourage you to type that in the chat.
So I bought these Lifeline plant-based Italian sausages, and the first two I cooked, somehow this plastic started showing up. And then I'm thinking maybe I put them in there, they were wrapped, and I just didn't see it, and I checked on these next two to see, and there was nothing I could grasp. And now look, I tried to see if this covering was on here, and it wasn't. You'll see some more.
So the consumer actually gave us video documentation of the problem, and we actually got the root cause from that video. The root cause truly was the consumer did not read the label. You can see on this slide here how the product should be prepared. But we see from the video that the consumer was actually boiling the plant-based sausage versus preparing it as per the label on a barbecue or even pan frying. So the response we sent in to FDA read, the consumer saw the plant-based edible casing separating from the sausage, which appeared to the consumer to have a plastic-like appearance. We've contacted this consumer and explained that the cooking instructions listed on the package were not followed. So the moral of this short story is always read that label. So Dr. Goodridge, now back to you for any questions or comments from our audience today.
Well, thank you so much, Sharon, for that wonderful discussion, and I really enjoyed that last example, that case study that you shared with us, and that I'd actually like to begin with that. So, this idea of consumers not reading instructions on food packages is something that I think is a major issue, and we've certainly seen some examples of that. For example, the issues with the raw breaded poultry that have caused a number of illnesses here in Canada because consumers think that the product is cooked and it's not cooked. So they heat it up instead of cooking it, and then essentially consume raw poultry and get sick. And you've just shown a video where a consumer did not follow the proper food production instructions. So my first question to you is, what do you think we're placing too much of a burden on consumers with respect to labels and following instructions and cooking instructions on various food products? I certainly have heard, anecdotally from people that they have overload because there's so much information and more information being placed on each product and products daily. So they don't even read the instructions. So are we placing too much of a burden on the consumers with respect to this, do you think?
Thanks for your question. I was very familiar with the further processed poultry file because I worked with that on our company on behalf of our meat business. And yes, there was an outbreak here in Canada for a number of years. There were numerous illnesses for those on the call who are not familiar with that. And to your specific question about, is it a burden? Absolutely, it is not a burden. We, the consumers, are part of the food supply chain. It starts right at the farm through the producers, the processors, as well as the consumers who need to read that label from a labeling regulatory perspective, as well as even the consumer from a food safety regulatory perspective.
Great, thank you. And we have several questions from our attendees. The first one being, can a claim for plant-based food be allowed under regulatory requirements?
I'm not clear on the question there, Dr. Goodridge. Can I claim for plant-based foods? Can you repeat it?
So can a claim for plant-based food be allowed under regulatory requirements?
Yes, you can use some claims that are specific to plant-based foods. Yes, you can. And I know that's a very generic question, so I unfortunately have to give a very generic answer. If it's about a specific claim, that person, you're welcome to contact me after. But a lot of the meat claims are allowed on plant-based products. I believe that's what perhaps the audience member who put that in the chat is referring to. But once the key piece is about evidence and support for a claim. You need to make sure that you have that so there is no enforcement.
Great. We have quite a few questions from our attendees here, so I'll be going through them. Would the vendor need to list on the package? Oh, so the next two questions will be related to the video that you showed. So the first question is, would the vendor need to list on the package how not to cook the item to ensure this situation doesn't happen again?
We've actually talked about that internally a lot. It's very easy to overlook the word not from a consumer perspective, so it's easier to tell a consumer how to cook. So if you put not how to cook and then how to cook, that will actually confuse the consumer. Hopefully that helps with that question.
Great. And following up on that, another question is, what is the casing material? Why did that come out as transparent material? And would the casing burn out by cooking using the given instructions? And I think you addressed part of that question earlier.
Absolutely. It is an edible casing. It is actually hardened in the process at the facility using technology. It is, you can eat that casing, but because the consumer boiled the sausage, it actually floated up in the water. It dissolved itself. If it was pan fried or barbecued, it actually would adhere to the protein. I'm not going to call it a meat block, the additive protein, and it would look like a whole sausage. It wouldn't be separated.
Okay. Here's another question. I'll read it. It's not clear to me, so perhaps if you don't understand it, we can ask the person asking to clarify. But the question is, what does your finished product release matrix include for micro on plant-based?
So I think the person's asking, and we actually asked ourselves this question at very early stages of the process. So the question I think the person's asking is, what are the micro hazards in plant-based products? I remember in early stages of the innovation, the RDT team calling me and saying, Sharon, what are the hazards? Exactly that question. And I said, go back to basic HACCP. What are your ingredients coming in? What are the hazards in those plant-based proteins, be it pea, be it mung? Look at the cross-contamination factors at the facility. So those are based on the ingredients coming in, the raw materials coming in.
Okay. And some more questions here. How do you recommend that plant-based proteins like pea be labeled when they are component ingredients? As per HC regs, I assume HC is Health Canada, they do not need to be labeled if they are non-priority allergens. And that was a question.
That is a very good question. I'm glad that person asked that question. So pea is not a priority allergen here in Canada or the US. There are known sensitivities to pea for those who have peanut allergies. On our products, we have put in a precautionary labeling statement to warn consumers about the pea in that pea protein ingredient. But again, it's not mandatory because it's not regulated as of now.
Great. We continue to receive questions from attendees. This is really great. This is a really great discussion that we're having here. Our next question is, with regard to the cook how not to cook question, where do you see the new line between consumer education with preparation steps against expected quality of finished product? Do you notice an uptick of consumer complaints and equally a parallel negative effect to brand perception or quality?
Absolutely, there is a linkage. So we communicate via the label, and we expect the consumer to read that. Absolutely, there are valid consumer complaints that come in, but truly some are also not valid. People just want a free coupon, right? As a company, we actually treat each one as a true complaint, be it a food safety, a quality, a regulatory, a labeling complaint. So we would treat one as ideal and unique. If we do see a trend, especially of food safety and quality complaints, we do that at our processing facilities as part of it should be part of any food safety program, be it plant-based or meat or non-meat, even candies. You should be able to trend your consumer complaints, see what is that factor that needs improvement, and pursue that accordingly, with corrective actions and a whole monitoring program as well.
Great. Our next question is, what is the largest constraint to the Canadian regulations versus the US regulations?
The largest constraint are those three that I mentioned. The simulated, as well as putting plant-based on the label, the fortification that adds cost, and then that methodology, the PDCAS versus the PER. PDCAS, again, to reemphasize that, is innovative, brand new technology used in Europe and USA. In Canada, we use a PER process, which are animal-based. It's actually, you're probably familiar with this, Dr. Goodridge. There are actually mice in a lab doing a digestibility study, and that is really not very innovative.
Great, thank you for that. Another question. How do you monitor the cleaning effectiveness between producing meat and plant-based items? Would you follow a rigid structure similar to allergen?
Exactly, it's very similar to allergens. There is no silver bullet to this at all. Use all the same techniques that you use for meat products. Use ATP swabbing. You can use total plate count micro swabbing. You can use visual changeovers as well. They're scheduling. I mentioned a couple of them. Segregation procedures of all of the subcomponents of segregation: raw materials, people, PPEs, dedicated lines. There is no silver bullet.
Great. We have a couple more questions here. What is the risk level for plant-based products? Will it be categorized under high risk?
The Government of Canada has not yet categorized this group of foods in their hazard database. I have not yet seen any of those hazards even identified in hazard databases in other countries. So again, we are responsible of assessing that risk and determining that risk. So I would suggest you go through your basic hazard principles. Identify the hazard, do your hazard analysis, and put in place control measures to mitigate those risks, reduce or minimize the hazard.
And what is the current transparency on plant-based protein labels when it comes to stabilizers and additives used in the final product?
Now that's a very, very detailed question. Those are prescribed in the Canadian simulated meat regulations, and you can actually find that in Health Canada's FDR.
Great. And I have a question, which is, so, we've talked about there's meat-based products, there's plant-based products, and now we've started to see combinations of the two. So what are the challenges with respect to, combining plant-based and meat-based into one product? And certainly, I'm particularly interested in, we've talked about cross-contamination with allergens and so forth. And I'm also particularly interested in, a large company such as Maple Leaf, which would have many different product lines, and how that's all controlled.
Yes, perfect. Thanks for asking that question. So I did not include this in one of my slides, but we have a product called Fusion. It's 50-50. It's half meat and half plant-based. And there are, again, no silver bullets to the challenges. You look at the hazards, you assess them, you mitigate those risks. Just like you would manage a meat-only product or a plant-based only product. The advantage of having a Fusion product is it actually provides an opportunity for consumers who may be hesitant to try a plant-based only product to slowly get into that area. So it's more from a market share perspective, that's the advantage to us. But from a technology perspective or from a pure science perspective, there are truly no disadvantages at all.
So my question is perhaps a little another bit of a different question, or a step away from what we've been talking about. So I've not yet tried plant-based products. Actually, I did try one, a sausage. Um, I'm just wondering, do you have any insight into consumer feedback with respect to sensory of the any sensory feedback on the product? I certainly have lots of friends who have tried various products, and some think they're wonderful, some think you can't they can't tell the difference, others think they're horrible and you can tell the difference. So I'm just wondering if you might be able to share any insights that you might have heard with respect to that.
Yes, we do a lot of pilot, a lot of work in our product development process before we even launch, across Canada. And the consumer sensory was very positive for the Fusion products. It was about, wow, it really does taste more like a meat product than a plant-based product. And perhaps a lot of that was actually not about the palate. It was actually in the brain telling us that, yes, it actually tasted more like meat. But again, those individuals, when those studies are done, they're not done side by side, right, with a plant-based product and a very like Fusion product. So I'd suggest everyone go out there and buy some of that product, and you can try it, side by side, and tell us what you think. We encourage that feedback.
Wonderful. So we have time for one more question, and it's from an attendee. The question is, the CFIA is doing a consultation on simulated meat guidelines. Do you think they are trying to align the Canadian regulations with US and EU regs?
So right now, like I mentioned on the slides, there's no guidance in the US on simulated products. We are very well aware of that simulated proposed guidance in Canada, as well as the survey that went out. And I think CFI is just trying to figure it out themselves. And I'm hoping, like I mentioned in my slide deck, that Agri-Food, together with Health Canada, where most of the advocacy has happened, as well as CFIA, work together to figure this out for the products that are sold here or made here in Canada. Right now, the regulators, and I apologize for my colleagues on the call who are representing the regulators in the audience, but I'm hoping that your agencies can work together, because that's been the struggle in the past. So hopefully that helps, Dr. Goodridge.
Well, we're unfortunately out of time. What a wonderful discussion that we've had. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, Sharon.